The professionals who have the hardest time turning their expertise into consulting income are not the ones who know the least. They are almost always the ones who know the most. And there is a specific reason for that, one that the standard advice on starting a consulting practice never accounts for. If you've spent 30 years becoming genuinely expert at something, you've also spent 30 years building a mental architecture so complete, so internally integrated, that pulling a piece of it out and handing it to someone else feels almost impossible. Not because the expertise isn't there, because it's everywhere. What this video is going to give you is a 3-part extraction framework, a specific process for surfacing the highest value consulting niches already embedded in your career history, naming them in language a buyer immediately understands, and pricing them in a way that reflects what they're actually worth, not a general orientation toward consulting. A working framework you can begin applying before this video ends. Now, to better understand why deep expertise resists packaging, let's look at what's actually happening at the cognitive level. There's a phenomenon in cognitive psychology called the curse of knowledge. It was documented first in academic research in the late 1980s, and it describes something that anyone who has tried to teach a complex skill to a beginner has experienced. Once you know something deeply, you lose access to what it felt like not to know it. The implication for consulting is specific and serious. When someone with 30 years of expertise tries to describe what they do to a potential client, they are not translating from a simple language to a complex one. They are trying to compress an integrated system, one built over decades, refined through failure, tested under real conditions, into a sentence that a person without the context can evaluate in 30 seconds. And the brain resists that compression. Not because the expertise isn't valuable, because the brain has spent 30 years building connections between ideas that feel inseparable, and the request to pull one thread out cleanly feels like a violation of something true. This is why the standard consulting advice, find your niche, pick one thing, get specific, produces a particular kind of frustration in senior professionals that it doesn't produce in people at the beginning of their careers. A 35-year-old consultant is picking a niche from a relatively contained set of experiences. A senior professional navigating this transition is being asked to reduce a career's worth of integrated judgment to a single lane, and every instinct they've developed says that's not how the work actually functions. That instinct is correct. The problem is not that niche selection is wrong. The problem is that the standard process for finding a niche was designed for people who are building expertise. You are not building expertise, you are sitting on top of it. And that requires a fundamentally different extraction process. This is where the extraction framework comes in. It has 3 components. Each one surfaces a different layer of the expertise that's already in the career. And each one produces a different type of consulting niche with a different buyer profile. The first layer is decisions. Over the course of a 30-year career, a senior professional has made a category of decision that most organizations encounter once or twice a generation. Restructurings, system migrations, crisis responses, market entries, regulatory pivots, team rebuilds under pressure. These are not skills that can be learned from a course. They are judgment that was built in real time, under real stakes, with real consequences. The first extraction question is this: what are the 3 most consequential categories of decision you made in your career? Not the most frequent, the most consequential. And which of those decisions do you see other organizations getting wrong right now? That gap between what you know and what you see being mishandled is a consulting niche. Write that down before moving to the second layer. The second layer is crises. Every senior professional has navigated at least one situation that had no playbook, where the standard frameworks failed, the institutional response was inadequate, and they had to build a response from scratch. That improvised response became knowledge. And that knowledge is extraordinarily difficult to find anywhere else, because the only way to acquire it is to have been in the situation. The second extraction question: what is the crisis or inflection point from your career that you handled that most people in similar roles would have handled badly? And what specifically did you understand that they didn't? The answer to that question is not a war story. It is a consulting offer. The third layer is translations. Senior professionals in almost every field have spent decades translating between worlds that don't naturally communicate, between technical teams and executive leadership, between regulatory frameworks and operational reality, between what an institution says it wants and what it actually needs. That translation capacity is invisible to the people who have it because it became automatic. It is not invisible to the organizations that lack it. The third extraction question: what two worlds, functions, or languages have you spent your career bridging? And where do you see that gap costing organizations the most right now? 3 questions, 3 answers, 3 consulting niches, not invented, not chosen arbitrarily, but extracted directly from what the career actually built. Now there is a second problem that the extraction framework alone does not solve. And it is the one that causes most senior professionals to undercharge so significantly that it undermines the entire practice before it begins. The problem is that the default pricing instinct for someone coming out of a salaried career is to convert their annual compensation into an hourly rate and offer that. That instinct is structurally wrong, and understanding why changes everything. When a client hires a senior consultant, they are not buying time. They are buying the elimination of a specific risk, or the acceleration of a specific outcome, or the prevention of a specific mistake. Outcomes that have a dollar value in their business that has nothing to do with how many hours it takes to deliver them. A decision that would have taken an organization 18 months to reach on its own, through trial, error, internal debate, and expensive mistakes, can be reached in 2 days with the right advisor in the room. The value of those 2 days is not calculated by multiplying an hourly rate by 16. It is calculated by the cost of the 18 months that didn't happen. This is the pricing shift that transforms a senior professional from an expensive freelancer into a premium advisor. Not a different number, a different question. The question is not, what is my time worth per hour? The question is, what is the outcome worth to the organization? And what percentage of that value is reasonable to charge for accelerating or protecting it? That reframe is not motivational language. It is how every premium consulting relationship that has ever existed was actually priced by the people on both sides of the table who understood what was being exchanged. What the market owes someone who spent 35 years becoming an expert is not nothing. And the first step toward collecting it is pricing the outcome, not the hour. The extraction framework gives you the 3 niches. The pricing architecture gives you the model. What comes between those and a first paid engagement is a sequence, and that sequence is what the second act blueprint maps out across 90 days, week by week, starting from exactly where this video leaves off. If the direction is clear, but the path from here to a paying client still isn't, the link in the description is the next step. Let's move on to one more piece, because the framework and the pricing model are only useful if the first conversation with a potential client goes well. And that conversation has a specific structure that most senior professionals have never been taught, because it is the opposite of what their careers trained them to do. For 30 years, the professional's job in a meeting was to demonstrate what they knew, to answer questions, to show command, to establish credibility through the depth and speed of their responses. The first consulting conversation does not work that way. The most effective first conversation a consultant can have is structured almost entirely around questions, not answers. Here is why that matters structurally. When a senior professional walks into a first conversation and leads with their expertise, even when that expertise is genuinely impressive, they are asking the potential client to evaluate something abstract. When they lead with questions, specific, diagnostic questions about the client's actual situation, the client begins answering, and in answering, begins revealing the exact shape of the problem they need solved. The consultant is not performing expertise. They are demonstrating it through the quality and precision of the questions they ask. The diagnostic question structure has 3 layers. The first layer surfaces the presenting problem, what the client believes the issue is. The second layer surfaces the cost of that problem, what it is costing the organization in measurable terms, even if the client hasn't calculated it yet. The third layer surfaces the timeline, how long this has been unresolved, and what has been tried. By the time those 3 layers have been explored, 2 things have happened. The client understands their own problem more clearly than they did when they walked in. And the consultant, without having delivered a single piece of advice, has demonstrated more value than most advisors deliver in a formal presentation. That is the first consulting conversation. Not a pitch, not a credential review, a diagnostic in which the expertise shows up through the quality of the questions, and the client leaves the room already thinking of the consultant as someone they need. The framework is here. The extraction, the pricing, the first conversation. The 90-day sequence from where this video ends to a first paid engagement is in the description. And here's something worth reflecting on. What's the single area of expertise from your career that you found hardest to describe to someone outside your field? And what have you tried when you've attempted it? Leave that in the comments. You came into this video with 30 years of expertise and a translation problem. That is worth naming precisely. The problem was never that you didn't have something to offer. The problem was that the standard frameworks for packaging expertise were built for people who are still accumulating it, and applying them to a career like yours produced exactly the kind of frustration you've been experiencing. The extraction framework is different because it starts where you actually are, not with what should I specialize in, but with what have I already built that someone else would take 30 years to develop on their own, and where do I see that gap costing organizations right now? The decisions layer surfaces the judgment that took decades to develop. The crises layer surfaces the knowledge that can only come from having been in the room when things go wrong. The translations layer surfaces the capacity to bridge worlds that don't communicate, the capacity that organizations with siloed structures will pay significantly for. Those three questions, answered honestly, do not produce a vague consulting identity. They produce three specific offers, each grounded in something real, each legible to a buyer, each priced not by the hour, but by the outcome it protects or accelerates. Before this video ends, write one sentence for the decisions layer. Not a business plan, not a website. One sentence, the category of decision you've made that others in your field consistently get wrong, and what you understand about it that they don't. That sentence is the beginning of something real. Most professionals navigating this transition never write it. Write it. The expertise doesn't retire. Only the title does.